We've had a lot of back and forths about the selection colors and what works and what doesn't work. Lots of suggestions from users of the app. And I just want to quickly show you some of the implementations I've tried. So currently we have this yellow semi-transparent color. And as you can see, it sometimes makes it quite hard to see what's selected and what isn't, especially if there's a lot of background colors. On the other hand, on a plain white background, it's fairly clear and works pretty well. Personally, I kind of like it. It's very usable. It's distinct. There are a few issues. So, for example, there's an issue with the coloring of the yellow box, which is indistinguishable basically from selection. And then there's some colors which are mixed with yellow become very similar. So purple with yellow becomes basically orange. So there's these issues. Now, what I've tried is a version with a blue outline. We had a couple of experiments with minor outlines. So you can see there's a small dark edge around each square, which doesn't really work well with lots of separate cells in different colors, but works slightly better when there's a large white background. But in those cases, you don't really need it. So I think Simon is using one of these right now, but it's not that effective. So this is the one I've tried now. So this replaces the individual cell coloring with an outline around the entire selection. So currently I'm experimenting with having the border inside the area. I've tried outside as well, but it's not as clear, I believe. And I'm lighting up the inside a little bit, as you can see here. Of course, that doesn't really do anything for purely white squares. But then I'm kind of relying on the outline to identify what's in the selection and what isn't. There are a few edge cases where that's not super clear. So for example, in a situation like that, these two squares. But I think by having the outline entirely inside the selection, it makes it clear that this is part of the selection, this isn't. Now, on purely white backgrounds, it's slightly less clear because, especially when you have a large selection, right? So let's say I do something like this. It might be a little like, is this selected or not, right? Because the slight brightening of the background obviously doesn't work very well on white. Now, unfortunately, these colorings aren't per cell. They're just polygons, right? So the only way to know if something is underneath this area is to do polygon intersections. And then I'm not guaranteed that it's entirely within. So it's not a trivial task of saying, oh, let's flip the background color if the background is white. Now, I experiment with one alternate style where I filled in. So I first, one thing I also don't like is the dark, the blue can sometimes be a little bit overwhelming, the blue border. Here it works fine, but especially on puzzles with a lot of details near the edges, like this killer, the blue kind of makes it super messy. Like, who knows, like this cell or this cell, who knows what cage it belongs to, right? So I've tried it here with a slightly more transparent outline and using the yellow infill. Kind of trying to, I don't suggest to do those together. I'm just trying two things at once. So, try to imagine it with either the white infill or with the full blue outline. So here, obviously, we still have the problem with the background colors getting distorted. But maybe by adjusting the yellow to be ever so much fainter, that might help. Now, of course, who knows what the original color of this tetronymo is in here, right? So it kind of has that problem as well. And this is what it would look like on pure white. Now, on pure white, that's kind of nice. Ultimately, not everything will work perfectly fine for all puzzles, right? So ultimately, the idea of having these settings would be to change them according to the puzzle, to use the one that's more appropriate. So anyway, I just want to show you this. I'm probably going to release this today in this format, so you can switch it on in this white format. The yellow one, I don't know. But if you have kind of suggestions regarding this, hey, maybe let's try a very, very faint white, then at least, actually, let's try that right now, right? So if I overwrite the style and I make the fill very faint, actually, instead of doing it very faint, let's just make the yellow very, very bright. Let's try something like this. And let's try not overriding. So the outline. So let's try the deep blue outline and a faint, yeah, well, it's not super yellow anymore because obviously added a lot of blue component, so it makes this almost reddish color, but it's definitely easier to see. So then the question becomes, does it interfere a lot with these colors? Yes and no. I mean, this blue and green are already pretty close to each other. Let's make the color a little bit more pure yellow. Let's see what that would look like. That's maybe not too bad. I mean, now the white becomes an off-white. The thing is, all the colors are already pretty pastel and pretty light, so you can see there's always a bit of an issue. Now the green and the white becomes closer together. And if we try the same color here on the white, it definitely helps the white though. So that's also an option to kind of have a very, very mild off-white. I mean, there are some other possibilities, but I think by the time you add patterns, the problem is then the symbols become basically impossible to see. Now, the thick blue outline I also think is a little problematic. Like, especially let's say you see how it kind of interferes with that circle, and then some elements it interferes in one way versus another. You know, this is above, this is below. I mean, it definitely should be a little bit more transparent, I believe. Maybe not entirely like we had the previous version. So let's say 0.7 maybe, and make this fairly, maybe this even a little bit. Yeah, let's try this. If I do it like this, does the blue, oh, this is supposed to be more transparent now. Then we need to do this. Yeah, so now, but even then, you see the contrast is already pretty harsh. I don't think it helps that much. Anyway, this is just to show you sometimes, you know, I think about these things and I try them out, and not all things work in all puzzles. And the problem I have is that it has to work in all puzzles. I can't just have it look good in one specific puzzle or an empty grid or whatever, right? But that's why these are toggleable settings, so you can just change it if it doesn't suit you for that particular puzzle. And I'm going to overhaul the settings dialog and make all this stuff work better. So, and maybe in the future I can even store settings per puzzle. So if you're, I mean, again, this doesn't happen very often, but in case you play multiple puzzles at the same time and you're switching between them, it might remember the settings. Again, this is one of those things might not be worth doing because it's a very rare use case. Anyway, a lot of this works like that, and this was just a short insight on how I develop new features and what kind of testing goes into the suggestions that I get from the users, and the things I try. And then sometimes I spend a lot of time implementing something and it never makes it into the game because it just turns out it doesn't work in enough cases, even if in some rare circumstances it might work well. That's that. Thanks. And enjoy the Cracking the Cryptic videos with this software. Take care.